Okay, so I was just working on the Citadel and realized I wanted to take it into the engine to look at the scale. So I might as well do the little recording for the process and naming scheme that we do. Um, or that I do anyway for the map objects. So essentially, the first thing, if you're in Blender or Maya, both get these PDX Blender tools. Um, those are essential for doing this, so install those first. But then, after you have your ready to export thing here, so this would be my working model, this is my exported model, this is just a Boolean thing here. Um, After you have that, make sure it's triangulated or at least in quads. So I always apply a triangulate modifier to it, just so that I can be sure that everything is triangles. Um, the first thing you want to do is apply a paradox material, because otherwise it won't work. So my naming scheme for that is pdxmat underscore building special OT. This would be Citadel. Oh, actually, keep everything lowercase usually. So, um, you know, pdxmat for it's a paradox material. Building because it's a building. It's a special building, not a generic one. OT is Old Town. That's a special misnomer because Old Town has a bunch of buildings in it. Usually, if you just work on a single castle, you wouldn't need this. Um, and then, yeah, Citadel. So if this was just the High Tower, well, no, the High Tower is a bad example. If this was just River Run, I'd just call it, PDX Mat Building Special River Run. But since Old Town is made up of so many buildings, Citadel, we'll do that. Material type. Usually, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to do, but usually you'd just be using Paradox Mesh Standard. If you need um, a transparent texture for something, um, blend, Mesh Alpha Blend is usually the best. Additive works too, but that's more for particles. Um, at least I think so. Yeah, click that, click OK, and assign it. Now with the new beta of the tools, these are just black, which not super helpful. um, but you can go in and assign your textures if you have some, and then it looks normal. But so important too is to get the same naming scheme for your mesh building special OT Citadel. And even more important than that is going into your object and selecting the actual geometry. So this is an object node, the orange one, the green one is a geometry node, the red one here is material node. Go to the um, geometry node, and I just copy the mesh node, uh, yeah, naming scheme, except I put shape with a capitalized S at the end of it. That's just a vanilla convention that um, yeah, that I copied. That's how they do it. Mm. Theoretically, these could be the same name, but it gets confusing in the asset file, I think. Yeah, so save that real quick and hit export. That's everything you need to do in Blender. So obviously, go into the development folders, GFX, models, buildings, special, Old Town, and now I'm at the Citadel. You can see that exactly mirrors, um, the naming scheme of the file itself. So we're in the folder building, folder special, folder OT, or Old Town, Citadel, even though the folder is called buildings here, but it is a single building, so I call it building. Anyway, um, go into the Citadel. Now call it exactly that mesh name. So of the object node, so that's building special OT Citadel dot mesh. If you're just doing a static object, nothing that's you know, something to wear, anything that's in the character screen, that's portrait screen. You don't need that. You don't usually need locators either, unless you use them, in which case you'll know to enable them. That's for if you want to add an empty at a place where you want to spawn a particle, like in the top of the high tower, there's a large bonfire. So you could do that with a locator. Just put an empty there and then spawn the particle at that locator. Selected only, so only, your mesh that you selected, not everything. Your exporter will crash if you don't do this, and you have a huge file that it's trying to export that isn't all triangles and everything. So just export that. It should be relatively quickly, depending on how many triangles your mesh is. This is barely 1.5, so that's fine. So you have your mesh. The next thing you need is an asset file. That is what the engine will reference later. Yeah, wait, I'll just copy the high tower ones. Actually, it's already set. So in my workflow where I don't texture things yet, just to look at them, I just have these default placeholder textures. They're basically just a gray 1-pixel texture. So I copy those over and get the asset file of anything else. I'm using the starry set ones. You can literally use anything else. We just need that as a base to change up. Go into the asset file. And here you have essentially two larger categories. You have the paradox mesh and the entity. The paradox mesh is what the game will reference as, a mesh and object. And an entity is what that mesh will be in an entity. An entity can be more than a mesh. So an entity can also be a particle or like a holding, an automatically spawned holding thing. Yeah, the distinction is not really super important. You just have to change it up. So essentially, you here in PDX Mesh, you create the name that the game will use. So I just go with the standard thing and underscore mesh. Except I'll change this obviously to Citadel. File name. So this is important. This is the .mesh file that you just created. Essentially, all you need to do is replace these, but I'm going to go through what they actually mean. Just so that it's clear, because I think it helps the understanding, because everything is kind of it's always the same name, but it's actually referencing different things. So here in the mesh settings, you need to reference the actual file name, the geometry node, that green triangle thing. So this is the one that you added shape to. Essentially, you just replace this from the other fucking file that you copied again. And this is your three your three texture files that you'll have. So index is just if you have multiple meshes, you can have multiple mesh setting files here, essentially. Just copy paste that and then have a second mesh, so to speak, in this asset. And then you do index 0, index 1, etc. I will not be doing that because I only have one. But since I'm using these default textures, well, I might as well change them actually. No. Need to open it. Citadel. Let's just pretend I made textures for this. These are actually Correct. Usually I'll set it up like this, and then I can just overwrite the textures that I actually create at the end of it, just so that I have the asset file set up from the start. So naming scheme here for the textures is the same thing, except that you have a normal, a properties, and a diffuse add-on. That's the three textures that you'll be using. Properties is a combination of metalness, roughness, and emissive, I think. Oh no, emissive is a normal. What is the other thing? Ambient occlusion, maybe? Oh no, specularity. That's it. Roughness, metalness, and specularity. And then in normal, you have the normal map and the emissive texture if you have one. And the diffuse has, yeah, just the diffuse and the ambient occlusion if you're using one. But yeah, essentially just replace these two with Citadel. Oh, this would actually be quicker if I just do this. I could just do replace all, but again, I want to go through them individually. Star Recept to Citadel. Shader, standard, that's just the one that you clicked while exporting. So this is the standard shader. You'd need to change this if you were using another shader. And this is just the shader file. You'll probably never have to change this because all of the shaders are in this file. So this shader file is the text file essentially where all the different shaders are defined. So as long as we don't create any custom ones, I don't think we'll ever need to change this. Yeah, then the entity is, again, it needs a name. So instead of underscore mesh for the PDX mesh, we're going entity for the entity, and it's referencing the same thing with the PDX mesh here. So that's the same mesh file. So essentially, the entity references this PDX mesh, right? This is the PDX mesh that we just defined, the object, and this is the entity that will actually be using this object. So you're naming it something something entity and then referring to the PDX mesh there. And that's essentially all you need to know here. As soon as that's saved, that should just work. Unless you've had a spelling mistake, which can happen. Oh my fucking god, okay. What do you actually need to be doing is launch the game in debug mode. Holy shit. So, go to game settings, click open game in debug mode, so you can actually get into the map editor. You could just add an executable instruction that's minus map underscore editor, so it starts in the map editor every time immediately. But that's not always what I want, so I don't do that. So with debug mode enabled, go to play as any ruler, so you're on the map here. Go to map editor, or map underscore editor, rather. That'll start the map editor, surprisingly. Once you're in here, get rid of debug mode. That's tilde key by default, by the way. Yeah, just go anywhere on the map, really. What did I just make the citadel? So let's go down here. Go to the map objects editor. The first time you click this, it'll take a second to load, don't worry. It looks like it's frozen and crashed, but it doesn't. It just has a lot of objects to load. Or it hasn't. Okay. Once that's here, go to building layer, um, or any other layer that you're using, but you're probably using building layer if you're adding map objects. Create a new object type. I like draw this out a little more so it's a bit more visible. Thank you. Create a new object type. That'll add it right here in building layer. Call it whatever you're calling it. So here I'm gonna call it OT Citadel. It's a mesh. It is in building layer, that's correct. And we want it to be Citadel mesh. Yes. Uh, Spawn global objects mode. Either hit A or click this button and click it. So you might be, encountering this. Let me make it more visible. Your geometry seems to all be here, but it's looking fucked up. What you need to be doing sometimes is go back into Blender, go to your geometry data or object data, and then add and clear custom split normals data, export it, select it only, meshes, overwrite the whole thing. If that doesn't fix it, you actually need to open a new instance of Blender and import the .mesh file that you just exported. So go back to PDX Blender Tools, import the mesh, go to where the hell is building? Citadel here. Go to your mesh. Don't import any of those if you don't need them. Why does that look normal in here? Building special Citadel 000? Ah, wait, I fucked up. You actually do need to import with joint materials, because otherwise it'll change your name. So do that. Go to your geometry data, clear custom split normals data. For some reason, Blender always creates custom split normals data when you export it with the mesh with the PDX exporter for the first time. So export that again, just overwrite it. Meshes, not as blend shape, no skeletons, no locator, selected only, and export to PDX mesh. That should fix it. God damn it. This is awkward. Why is it so dark? I mean, the normals aren't fucked up anymore, it's just black. That must be an issue with the textures then. Let me check the asset file real quick. If I building special OD, I mean, when in doubt, copy, paste. Did that change it? Citradel. I called it Citradel. The file name here. That'll do it. What do you do in this case? Textures don't auto-refresh. Geometry data does, textures don't. So you just go reload texture, and then it'll take a bunch of time to reload all the textures, and then you can reload the textures. It's a good thing this happened, really, because otherwise I would not have thought to mention this. Motherfucker. Okay. Try reloading assets. Technically, I didn't change the asset. Ah, there it goes. Okay, there we go. This is how you import a mesh with a few tribulations. um, yeah, then just use the map objects thing to scale it properly so you can view it. You can only ever manipulate objects that you've actually selected before. So right now I'm in the move thing and it won't actually move anything because you need to go specifically to object selection, select the object or objects that you want to select, and only then can you move them. Um, that messed me up the first couple of times I tried to do this, so only ever try one thing at a time. This might actually be too small to justify all this detail that I'm putting into it. Anyway, that's it. At the end of the thing, just hit Control Save, and that should be that.